Hollywood had a simple contract. The men cheated and the women stayed silent. Today, we tear up that contract. We reveal 20 legendary stars whose wives refused to pay the emotional cost and secretly fought back with their own calculated acts. The Dark Side of Casablanca. Bogart and the Legend of Sluggy Hollow. The brightest stars of Hollywood's golden age gave us moments of romance on screen, but behind the gates, private lives often mirrored film noir. Before the smoky romance of Rick's Cafe, Humphrey Bogart lived a dramatic scenario. His toughest role was surviving a marriage marked by alcohol, volatility, and humiliation. Betrayal by the woman he called Sluggy. Long before Bogart found peace with Lauren Bacall, America's favorite tough guy was trapped with his third wife, Myo Methot. Their passion was volcanic, their arguments legendary, and their Beverly Hills home earned the ominous nickname Sluggy Hollow. Witnesses spoke of shattered glass, broken dishes, and furniture thrown. Bogart often found himself drinking alone at the studio bar, just to avoid the tension of his own home. Their fights were not quiet domestic quarrels. They were screaming matches heard across Mulholland Drive, frequently requiring the intervention of police or studio security to prevent physical harm. What few realized was that Methot's frequent alcohol-fueled rages were a classic case of projection. Mayo entertained numerous discreet visitors when her husband was away filming. Calculated indiscretion allowed her to maintain control, while Bogart carried the silent burden. A delivery man often arrived minutes after Bogart had departed, lingering unusually long. Studio executives knew that Methot's affairs were an open secret among the household staff, and this information gave her a quiet, psychological advantage over Bogart. The profound irony: the man who could outwit any villain found himself in an impossible position. Admitting his wife's unfaithfulness not only would have been a humiliating failure of masculinity, but could also have severely hurt his tough guy image. Bogart was forced to quietly endure the emotional torment and the public charade, believing his career depended upon his silence. The tension reached a crescendo during the filming of Casablanca. While Bogart worked long hours, Methot's visitors became even more frequent. The strain was nearly unbearable. Yet he kept smiling, transforming his private anguish into the cool detachment that defined his celebrated roles. He was perfecting his on-screen stoicism as a direct response to his off-screen misery. Their marriage finally ended in 1945, when Bogart fell deeply in love with Lauren Bacall. Insiders suggest a different narrative. Bogart had finally found the courage to leave a destructive partnership after years of quiet humiliation and heartbreak. He traded the chaos of Sluggy Hollow for a devoted partnership. The betrayal Bogart faced was rooted in volatility. But for our next star, Lucille Ball, the betrayal she endured was an open secret she eventually answered with a calculated act of her own. The greatest show on earth, Lucy's calculated betrayal. In the early 1950s, no couple shone brighter than America's favorite redhead, Lucille Ball, and her husband, Desi Arnaz. Their on-screen chemistry captivated audiences. Yet behind the scenes lurked a marriage riddled with infidelity. The ever-resilient Lucy devised a strategy for emotional survival few suspected. The challenges in the Arnaz marriage began with Desi. His womanizing was Hollywood's worst-kept secret. His infidelities were so numerous that studio publicists struggled to contain the flow of stories. Desi wouldn't just cheat, he'd do it in public places, as if he wanted the tables of Hollywood society to bear witness, revealed one executive. This compulsion for public indiscretion wasn't just recklessness. It was a deep form of disrespect for his wife and his marriage vows. For many years, the public narrative centered exclusively on Desi's continuous betrayals. This narrative missed the complexity of the shrewd businesswoman. Recently uncovered accounts suggest a far more nuanced reality. Lucille Ball eventually began having attachments of her own, not out of passion, but as a calculated, intellectual response to Desi's ongoing public disregard. It was a form of emotional survival for her, explained one longtime friend. After years of public slights, she decided that what was good for the goose was good for the gander. But unlike Dee, who conducted his affairs with reckless abandon, Lucy was strategic, meticulous, and discreet. She was a genius about protecting her hard-won image. She ensured that nothing ever threatened the commercial stability of their joint enterprise, Desilu, keeping her actions strictly separate from their professional lives. She reportedly developed close relationships with at least 2 of her co-stars, always taking care to maintain plausible deniability. While Desi's encounters were often fleeting, Lucy's were more substantive, built around intellectual connection and emotional compatibility. She formed bonds with men who offered the emotional support and respect her husband's immaturity failed to provide. Despite the mutual betrayals, Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz genuinely shared a deep, enduring passion. Even after their divorce in 1960, they never truly moved on emotionally. They could not live with each other, but they could not truly live without each other. Their volatile, passionate relationship simply proved too large and destructive to be contained by a single household. The calculated actions of the famous redhead stand in sharp contrast to the silent humiliation endured by our next star, Clark Gable, a Hollywood king whose early marriages were ruled by the whims of others. The dethroned king, Clark Gable's early marriages of control. He was the dashing Rhett Butler, the rugged symbol of masculine dominance. Clark Gable was, for decades, Hollywood's undisputed king. Yet before finding his great love, his earliest marriages revealed a man who was financially dependent and kept on a tight leash by his older, wealthier wives. The king was not always the sovereign of his own castle. Gable's transformation from an oil field worker into a sophisticated superstar was managed by the 2 women who became his first 2 wives. His initial marriage was to Josephine Dillon, a dramatic coach 17 years his senior. Dillon treated the aspiring actor more like a project than a husband, refining his rough speech, guiding his fledgling career, and paying for essential dental work. This control reportedly extended to Josephine, maintaining her own independent social life. She dictated his early wardrobe, monitored his social engagements, and demanded absolute professional focus as part of their arrangement. Given the significant age disparity, many historians believe this first marriage was structured as a business arrangement. Several sources noted gentlemen who visited Josephine when Clark was away. The king was being managed, professionally and privately. Gable's second marriage to Maria Langham followed a similar pattern. Langham was another older, wealthier woman, 11 years his senior, who provided Gable with crucial social connections. The arrangement was mutually beneficial, but sources suggested that Maria also maintained relationships with other men, particularly when Gable's rising fame kept him away from home. One Hollywood hostess recalled a European gentleman who seemed to appear whenever Clark was absent. Gable's submission to these unusual arrangements was the price he paid for accelerated access to Hollywood's elite, powerful circles. For years, the future icon endured these arrangements, quietly accepting the humiliation as the necessary price of admission into Hollywood's elite circle. He was playing a part, submitting to control, to secure his path to stardom. This script changed dramatically when Gable met and fell in love with actress Carole Lombard. Lombard, a vibrant comedy queen who was closer to his own age, allowed Gable to finally experience a true partnership built on genuine passion. With Carole, he was a different man, no longer the groomed project of someone else's design. He had finally broken free of the gilded cage. The humiliation of his early life stands in stark contrast to the quiet dignity of our next star. Next, we explore Gary Cooper, the American ideal whose marriage was sustained by an intricate, unwritten code of discretion. The quiet arrangement. Gary Cooper and the code of discretion. Gary Cooper embodied the ideal of the American gentleman on screen. Integrity, straightforwardness, and moral clarity defined his most celebrated roles. But off-screen, Cooper's 28-year marriage to socialite Veronica Rocky Balfe operated under different principles. A sophisticated, unwritten agreement understood by both parties. yet never publicly acknowledged. This was a code where absolute silence and the maintenance of the public facade were the only vows that truly mattered. Cooper's legendary indiscretions were poorly kept secrets. His public image as a devoted husband remained intact, due entirely to the formidable social grace of his wife, Rocky. She came from high society, where the only unbreakable rule was maintaining the perfect public facade. Rocky, one longtime family friend explained, wasn't naive. She had been raised in a world where rich and famous men were expected to be unfaithful. But their wives were expected to be flawless guardians of the family name. Once she realized that Cooper's wandering eye was a permanent feature, she made a calculated decision. Rather than confronting him, Rocky established her own discreet attachments. She was far too sophisticated to issue ultimatums. Instead, she quietly began cultivating relationships with intelligent, cultured men from her East Coast social circle. Rocky began having her own private flings after about a decade of marriage. The operative rule was absolute discretion. Rocky never created public scenes, and Cooper never challenged her private life. Cooper and Rocky maintained genuine affection throughout their marriage, sharing a private understanding. They were a couple who valued stability over scandal, even if it meant living separate romantic lives. This unspoken code was strained only once, when Cooper's intense 3-year affair with Patricia Neal threatened to shatter the facade. Cooper moved out, and divorce seemed inevitable. Friends noted that this was the one time Rocky truly drew a line. Affairs were acceptable, but falling deeply in love was not. It was the emotional depth of the betrayal, not the physical one, that nearly ended their union. Ultimately, Cooper ended the relationship and returned to his marriage. He chose the certainty of his stable home over the fiery, career-threatening passion of Neal. The all-American ideal preferred the certainty of an imperfect, stable home to the chaos of open, emotional warfare. The highly controlled arrangement of the Coopers stands in stark contrast to the reckless abandon of our next star. We turn now to Mickey Rooney, the energetic star whose boyish charm could captivate America, but couldn't keep a wife loyal for more than a year. But the boy who couldn't keep a wife, Rooney's cycle of betrayal. In the late 1930s and early 1940s, no young star possessed the boundless energy of Mickey Rooney. His boyish charm made him America's most beloved young actor. But off-screen, the 5'2" star's private life was a spectacular disaster, a chaotic cycle of 8 marriages, marked by his betrayal and his wife's inevitable payback. Rooney's romantic pattern was established early, beginning with his first marriage to Hollywood bombshell Ava Gardner in 1942. Once they were married, his focused energy dispersed, flowing back to the studio, to the racetrack, and to the attractions of Hollywood nightlife. Ava Gardner quickly became disillusioned with Rooney's constant absences and whispers of his infidelities. She allegedly began her own attachments with others, notably billionaire Howard Hughes, during the latter part of their brief marriage. This cycle, Rooney's wandering eye, followed inevitably by his wife's retaliatory actions, would become the repeating pattern of his romantic history. His second wife, Betty Jane Phillips, reportedly began a relationship with a musician after discovering his multiple infidelities. His third wife, Martha Vickers, allegedly became involved with a director while still married to the star. The consistency of the pattern suggested that Rooney was actively selecting women who possessed a strong, independent nature that inevitably clashed with his expectations of wifely devotion. The profound irony of Rooney's situation was that while he himself initiated the pattern of unfaithfulness, he reacted with explosive, righteous indignation when his wives eventually reciprocated. He would explode with jealousy. This from a man who couldn't go a week without chasing a new showgirl. The double standard was breathtaking, called one MGM insider. By his fifth marriage, the tragic pattern accelerated. Wives began looking elsewhere sooner. The boy who could charm an entire nation found his private life consumed by chaos. He was a man Unable to provide the steadfast devotion his wives eventually sought elsewhere. From Rooney's explosive domestic life, we turn to a marriage that was equally volatile, but operated on entirely different rules. Next, we explore Errol Flynn, the swashbuckler who shared a mansion with a wife whose approach to fidelity was every bit as casual as his own. The shared swashbuckle. When Errol Flynn met his match in Lily Demita, Errol Flynn swashbuckled his way into Hollywood history. But his first marriage to the sophisticated French actress Lily Demita was a domestic spectacle, a volatile household where marital fidelity was, ironically, the one adventure neither party was interested in pursuing. Flynn's reputation as a man devoted to pleasure was well documented. In Lily Demita, he met a woman whose approach to romantic commitment was every bit as casual and independent as his own. Lily was an established European star when she married Errol in 1935, and no one expected monogamy to be a condition of the arrangement. The Flynn-Demita marriage operated on a surprising, unspoken understanding. Both were free to pursue other interests, provided discretion and social grace was maintained. Guests recalled seeing Errol openly flirting with starlets in one room while Lily entertained her own admirers in another. It was a highly choreographed charade. The Flynns maintained separate bedrooms, connected only by a sitting room. It was like they were running parallel lives under the same roof, observed household staff. Despite the separate activities, guests noted a strange electric current of possessiveness and jealousy always ran between them. The arrangement was sustained by a strange, combative passion. Their arguments were legendary. They didn't just argue, they performed their arguments, shouting threats and passionate curses in French, German, and English. The staff learned to simply tune out the sound of crashing objects, knowing the volatile performance would end with an equally passionate reconciliation. Their marriage, fueled by drama and indulgence, finally ended in 1942 after 7 exhausting years. Friends suggested the relationship had simply run its course. The constant drama, jealousies, and competitive indiscretions could no longer sustain them. The unique arrangement of the Flynns offers a fascinating glimpse into a marriage that thrived on chaos. This is a far cry from the next star, William Holden, whose wife chose a quiet, long-term survival strategy instead of competitive drama. The Golden Boy's long game. William Holden and the discreet wife. William Holden epitomized the ideal of the all-American leading man. His 30-year marriage to actress Brenda Marshall, lasting from 1941 to 1971, was considered an eternity by Hollywood standards. The reality, however, was far more intricate. Behind the Golden Boy image lay a complex domestic arrangement. Holden's infidelities were legendary. His romances with co-stars, including Grace Kelly and Audrey Hepburn, were not even particularly discreet. What the public knew less about was the remarkable way Brenda Marshall responded. Rather than choosing the dramatic role of the long-suffering wife, Marshall made a calculated, intelligent choice. She decided she would maintain the marriage and family life, but she would also quietly seek emotional fulfillment elsewhere. Marshall was much too dignified to create scenes. She conducted her private life with extreme discretion, far more carefully managed than Holden's public dalliances. She developed several close relationships with men who provided the emotional attention that Holden's constant absences left lacking. These were quiet, dignified connections with intelligent, cultured men who offered her the respect and companionship she deserved. This arrangement created a functional household dynamic. They operated on an unspoken agreement. Brenda never confronted Bill, and in turn, he pretended not to notice her special friendships. Their compromise seemed less about enduring romantic passion and more about practicality, preserving the family structure. This quiet arrangement of mutual tolerance became the true secret to their Hollywood longevity. The quiet resolve of Brenda Marshall contrasts with the next couple. Next, we explore Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh, a dream couple whose glamorous facade hid an emotional vacuum that proved impossible to ignore. The dream that cracked. Tony Curtis, Janet Leigh, and the emotional void. In the 1950s, Tony Curtis and Janet Leigh were the living embodiment of Hollywood's ideal romance. But behind this facade lay a complicated reality, where Curtis's notorious womanizing created an emotional void that eventually triggered a response from Leigh that few outside their inner circle ever suspected. Curtis's reputation as a Hollywood charmer was well established, even before his marriage to Leigh in 1951. Becoming half of Hollywood's golden couple only made him more appealing. His infidelities were a consistent pattern. Everyone knew what was happening, except the general public, noted one studio insider. His brazenness seemed to stem from a need to constantly validate his charm and his success. The public narrative typically cast Janet Leigh as the loyal, long-suffering wife. However, Leigh's response was far more complex and proactive. When it became painfully clear that Tony's impulsiveness was not going to change, Leigh, determined not to be a victim, began establishing her own private connections outside the marriage. Unlike Curtis's often fleeting encounters, Leigh's relationships tended to be more substantive, built around intellectual compatibility and emotional support. She formed bonds with men who offered the emotional attention and respect her husband's immaturity failed to provide. Curtis pursued his conquests openly, while Leigh developed deeper, more carefully guarded connections. Curtis's highly visible disregard was ultimately less damaging than Leigh's invisible, profound emotional attachments, which filled the emotional vacuum left by her husband. The highly publicized marriage finally ended in 1962 after 11 years. The true breaking point came when Leigh formed an emotional attachment that made the emptiness of her own marriage impossible to ignore any longer. She moved on with the quiet resolve of a woman who had finally found the respect she deserved. The betrayal of an emotional void led one star to profound grief. Next, we explore Robert Walker, the sensitive actor who suffered the devastating humiliation of watching his wife leave him for the most powerful man in Hollywood. The devastated young man, Robert Walker, and the power of Selznick. Robert Walker achieved fame portraying sensitive young men, but Walker's most painful role was one he never chose. The devastated husband left behind when his wife, Jennifer Jones, began a very public, unapologetic attachment with the most formidable man in Hollywood, producer David O. Selznick. Walker and Jones were married in 1939. Everything changed in 1941 when Jones auditioned for David O. Selznick. Selznick was immediately captivated by the young woman. He signed her to a personal contract, famously changed her name to Jennifer Jones, and began meticulously crafting both her career and public image. By 1942, their professional relationship had evolved into a romantic one, while Jones was still married to Walker. The emotional torment for Walker was compounded by his complete powerlessness. Their attachment was the most public secret affair in Hollywood. Walker was powerless because Selznick was the de facto kingmaker who should destroy an MGM contract actor with a single phone call. Walker was forced to see them together at industry events, twisting the knife of humiliation in public. Walker was forced to watch this agonizing public drama unfold. Never emotionally robust, he began drinking heavily, a habit that would tragically contribute to his premature end. Jones filed for divorce in 1945. For Walker, the aftermath was devastating. Despite this crippling personal sorrow, Walker experienced a final professional renaissance in the early 1950s with his brilliant performance in Strangers on a Train. His life became a tragic cycle of chaos and brief professional triumph, tragically ended at just 32 years of age. Walker's story is a chilling reminder of the raw power dynamics of the studio system. It contrasts sharply with our next star, George Sanders, a cynical actor who was publicly scorned by a woman who seemed to delight in the attention her indiscretions brought her. The cynic. Outwitted George Sanders and the unruly Zsa Gabor. George Sanders built a legendary career playing sophisticated, cynical characters. The tragic irony was that in his marriage to the glamorous Hungarian actress Zsa Gabor, the great cynic found himself repeatedly mortified by a woman who seemed to delight in the public attention her indiscretions brought. Sanders and Gabor married in 1949. George was absolutely captivated with her initially, recalled one friend. That intense fascination quickly dissolved as Gabor's inclination for male attention became obvious. Gabor made little effort to conceal her wandering eye. She would flirt with other gentlemen right in front of George, engaging in overtly suggestive actions, well within earshot of her husband. Gabor's disregard went well beyond casual flirtation. She allegedly conducted numerous attachments during their marriage, including a widely rumored liaison with the Dominican diplomat Porfirio Rubirosa. When he eventually did object, she would dismiss his concerns with an amusing laugh. What made this situation profoundly humiliating for Sanders was the public nature of Gabor's indiscretions. Her attachments were often reported in columns. Sanders, a man who deeply valued his dignity, found himself increasingly cast as the disgraced husband. Sanders's painful response revealed the complex psychology of a man torn between his pride and his persistent fascination. He alternated between cold withdrawal and desperate attempts to compete with her other admirers. He tried expensive gifts and passionate pleas, but nothing could sway Zsa from her path of public attention and social maneuvering. This painful dynamic continued for approximately 5 years before Sanders finally filed for divorce in 1954. In a bizarre epilogue, Sanders would later marry Zsa's sister, Magda. The great cynic's final act, the note that simply said, "Dear world, I am leaving because I am bored," remains the ultimate expression of a man disillusioned by the lack of fidelity. Before he entered the political arena, Ronald Reagan was simply the Gipper, a Hollywood leading man. His first marriage to the ambitious, talented actress Jane Wyman was a classic Hollywood pairing. Yet, this union ended not from lack of affection, but because Wyman found the intensity of an intellectual connection elsewhere. The Gipper's first act, Ronald Reagan and the actress who moved on. Reagan and Wyman were married in 1940. A fundamental difference in their temperaments and ambitions began to emerge. Reagan was a simple, devoted man. Wyman, on the other hand, was growing into a versatile, serious actress who yearned for greater dramatic challenges. As Wyman's artistic aspirations outstripped those of her husband, she began to seek companionship that matched her rising intellectual hunger. Her subsequent attachment was reportedly to a co-star, the thoughtful, intense Lew Ayres. Wyman was looking for a partner who could engage with her on a different, more challenging level. The emotional distance grew, and the marriage began to dissolve with a quiet, creeping sense of incompatibility. Jane Wyman needed intensity. Ronald Reagan offered comfort. She sought complexity. He offered simplicity. The decision to end the marriage in 1949 was ultimately Jane Wyman's. She recognized that their paths had diverged. Reagan maintained a resolute dignity. He never once publicly criticized Wyman or spoke ill of her choice to leave him. He quietly endured the heartbreak, believing personal honor was more important than public gossip. Though the marriage to Wyman ended, it paved the way for Reagan's later, deeply satisfying union with Nancy Davis. He moved forward, his wholesome image intact, while Wyman's decision underscored that not all Hollywood breakups are fueled by malice. Some are simply the result of two good people growing apart. The polite but determined departure of Jane Wyman contrasts sharply with the public betrayal of our next star. Next, we explore Eddie Fisher, the singing idol who was betrayed not just by a wife, but by his closest friend in a scandalous social exchange that captivated the world. The man between wives. Eddie Fisher and the swap of a lifetime. Eddie Fisher was a performer whose voice seemed to promise wholesome devotion. Yet his private life was defined by spectacular, high-profile unions. His most infamous relationship involved a betrayal that eventually turned the tables, showing the singing star the true anguish of being left behind by his closest friend. Fisher's first marriage to Debbie Reynolds ended sensationally when he began a whirlwind affair with the recently widowed Elizabeth Taylor. The public was stunned by the betrayal. After marrying Taylor, Fisher experienced the peak of his fame. This union was itself brief, ending when Taylor fell deeply in love with Richard Burton. Fisher was left utterly devastated, suddenly realizing the profound grief he had inflicted upon Debbie Reynolds just years earlier. He was the betrayed, not the betrayer. It was in this emotionally vulnerable period that Fisher sought comfort in the arms of his old friend, the wealthy industrialist Harry Carl. In a shocking development, it was Carl who eventually married Fisher's first wife, Debbie Reynolds. Fisher, the man who had orchestrated one of Hollywood's greatest betrayal scandals, was now faced with the reality of his own closest friend marrying the woman he had abandoned. It was a dizzying exchange of partners. The social shaming he received after Taylor left him was exponentially greater than anything Debbie Reynolds had endured, because the public had already judged him a faithless husband. Fisher's personal journey became a revolving door of betrayal, illustrating how the intense passions and complex dynamics of Hollywood often create cycles of heartbreak and abandonment. The constant public churn of Eddie Fisher's love life stands in sharp contrast to the steadfast, yet secretly fractured, marriage of our next star. We turn now to Burt Lancaster, the rugged acrobat whose long-term wife chose quiet tolerance over public emotional warfare. The acrobat and the actress, Burt Lancaster's long-suffering wife. Burt Lancaster projected an image of raw, untamed masculine energy on the silver screen. Yet his almost 40-year marriage to Norma Anderson was sustained only by his wife's quiet tolerance of his prolific, long-term infidelity, a decision she made to protect the integrity of their family life. Lancaster and Norma were married in 1946. Lancaster's indiscretions were continuous and widely discussed. Norma, a strong-willed woman, made a clear choice. She became the silent guardian of their family unit, choosing quiet tolerance and dignity over public vindication. This created a functional understanding. Norma would maintain the facade of the devoted Hollywood wife, and in return, Lancaster was expected to provide stability and support for their 5 children. Norma's composure was born of a firm resolve to prioritize the security of her children. She bore the quiet misery of her husband's highly public actions. The enduring nature of their marriage became a testament to her powerful will. She ensured that outside the front door, their family appeared untouchable, a deliberate act of public relations. Lancaster relied entirely on Norma's emotional stability to maintain the home life that anchored his success. He pursued his passions with reckless abandon. She managed the fallout with quiet, unshakable grace. The dichotomy of his private chaos and her public calm was a paradox Hollywood found endlessly fascinating, solidifying their status as an enduring, if unconventional, couple. The 4 decades of their union stands as a complicated example of compromise. Norma's silence was her power. This long-term, turbulent arrangement contrasts sharply with the betrayal of our next star, Gene Kelly, the cheerful dancer, whose wife grew weary of his emotional coldness and sought a different kind of connection entirely. The dancer's shadow, Gene Kelly, and the price of perfection. Gene Kelly danced his way into the hearts of millions. Yet behind the smiles lay a demanding, relentlessly perfectionist, and often emotionally cold personality. His first wife, Betsy Blair, grew weary of being the silent partner, eventually seeking emotional support outside the demands of his genius. Kelly and Blair were married in 1941. Kelly's perfectionism often translated into a demanding emotional distance at home. He expected absolute dedication to his vision, leaving little room for his wife's needs. Betsy Blair found herself increasingly playing the role of quiet support for a man who seemed to prioritize his next dance sequence over domestic intimacy. As the emotional gap widened, Blair began to seek a different connection, one based on intellectual stimulation and shared emotional vulnerability. She reportedly developed an emotional attachment with a figure who offered a stark contrast to Kelly's demanding persona. This attachment was a quiet plea for the emotional validation and partnership her genius husband seemed unable to provide. The environment of their marriage was further complicated by the political pressures of the time. Blair's liberal views put her at odds with the paranoia of the McCarthy era. The woman who was expected to live happily in the dancer's shadow realized that her marriage had become a complex, lonely obligation. They divorced in 1957. For Blair, it was a liberating, if heartbreaking, move towards reclaiming her own identity. The quiet, intellectual betrayal that ended the Kelly-Blair marriage is a study in emotional incompatibility. This is quite different from the sheer staying power of the next star. We turn now to James Cagney, the famously faithful gangster whose marriage was so solid that even the whispers of infidelity remain an enduring, quiet mystery. The gangster's steady heart, James Cagney, and the enduring mystery. In an era defined by scandal, James Cagney was a profound anomaly. He was a fiercely devoted family man whose decades-long marriage to his beloved wife, Frances Billie Vernon, stood as a quiet rock of stability. Cagney and Billie were married in 1922 and remained together until his passing over 6 decades later. This enduring union was rooted in shared respect, loyalty, and a resolute commitment to privacy. In the mid-1940s, rumors began to circulate about Billie. The whispers suggested she had developed an attachment with a close family friend. The difficulty in confirming the truth lies in Cagney's fierce, successful defense of his family's privacy. Cagney immediately brought his formidable intensity to bear on the situation, ensuring the gossip was stifled before it could leak into the press. He personally called columnists, making his outrage and his absolute commitment clear. Cagney had an almost monastic discipline when it came to his own affairs. He considered his marriage and his home a sacred sanctuary. Cagney quietly weathered whatever private storm occurred. He refused to let scandal touch his family, prioritizing his commitment to Billie above his own immediate personal anguish. The rumors were successfully buried. Cagney's life stands as a testament to the belief that discipline and fierce loyalty could triumph over Hollywood's temptations. The quiet power of his enduring love stands in stark contrast to our next subject, a popular singer whose career depended on hiding his wife's private struggles and indiscretions from the adoring public. We turn now to Bing Crosby, the velvet baritone whose fame rested on keeping his first marriage's turmoil a secret. The velvet baritone's private pain, Bing Crosby, and the first wife. Bing Crosby was the undisputed king of popularity, yet his fame was built upon a profound irony. The charming public persona was sustained by a stringent private life that worked diligently to hide the turmoil of his first marriage to actress Dixie Lee. Crosby and Dixie Lee were married in 1930. As Crosby's career soared, Dixie Lee's life became difficult. She found herself increasingly isolated. The pressures of fame contributed to Dixie Lee's long and painful struggle with alcohol dependency, a private battle that the studio system worked tirelessly to conceal. Whispers began to circulate that Dixie Lee had developed various attachments. The studio's efforts to protect Crosby's image were intense and unrelenting. Dixie Lee's struggles were treated as a dire threat to a valuable commercial asset. Crosby was portrayed as the devoted, patient husband, while the true depth of Dixie Lee's emotional misery was expertly erased from the public record. This cover-up was crucial, as Crosby's commercial success depended entirely on the public believing in his stable, wholesome character. Crosby quietly funded the necessary resources to manage the situation, prioritizing his career above all else. For years, Dixie Lee lived in the immense shadow of her husband's image. Her existence became a quiet sorrow, obscured by the very fame she helped enable. The intense control exerted by Bing Crosby's team contrasts sharply with the public dramas of our next star. We turn now to Don Ameche, the smooth operator whose wife's affairs became an open secret within a marriage that, incredibly, remained unbroken for over 50 years. The smooth operator's long road. Don Ameche's unbreakable vow. Don Ameche was the perpetual romantic lead, yet his marriage to Honorée Prendergast was a study in profound contradictions. Despite Ameche's own alleged infidelities, he was forced to grapple with his wife's attachments as well, an unexpected complication in a union that, against all odds, remained unbroken for over 50 years. Ameche and Honorée were married in 1932. Their union was remarkable for its half-century duration. The irony, however, lay in the fact that this longevity was not necessarily a reflection of conventional marital bliss. While Ameche was known for his roving eye, he was reportedly stunned when he discovered that his wife was also seeking comfort elsewhere. The emotional complexity meant that Ameche, the charming man who often initiated the indiscretions, was now faced with the unexpected torment of being on the receiving end. Honorée's attachments became an open secret. While she did not seek the public spectacle of figures like Zsa Zsa Gabor, she maintained discreet, long-term relationships with gentlemen who provided the emotional and intellectual companionship that her famous, often absent husband was not providing. She was a stylish, witty woman who refused to be relegated to the role of the silent, long-suffering spouse. This dynamic created a functional structure. The marriage was sustained not by unwavering fidelity, but by a powerful mutual commitment to its permanence. Ameche was forced to accept the complex reality of their union. He realized that to keep his family intact, he had to cede his expectation of absolute devotion. The marriage became an arrangement based on profound realism. They found a way to share a life together, respecting their vows in the letter of the law, even if the romantic spirit had been compromised. They shared 9 children and a deep shared history. This difficult, enduring realism stands in powerful contrast to the emotional integrity of our next star. We turn now to James Stewart, the shy, moral compass of cinema, who was forced to navigate the heartbreak of his closest friend's marriage, reinforcing his own steadfast commitment to honor. The moral compass, Jimmy Stewart, and the test of a lifetime. James Stewart was the quintessential American everyman whose on-screen integrity made him the moral compass of Hollywood cinema. Stewart eventually found a long and happy marriage, yet his path was complicated by the devastating breakup of his closest friend's marriage. Stewart's marriage to Gloria Hattrick McLean in 1949 settled the question of whether the shy actor would ever find lasting domestic happiness. Stewart's closest friendship was with the great complex actor Henry Fonda. Fonda's second marriage, to Frances Ford Seymour, was a highly turbulent affair. Whispers began to circulate that Frances had developed an attachment outside the marriage. For James Stewart, watching his best friend's marriage disintegrate was a deep personal heartbreak. Stewart found himself in the agonizing role of the loyal confidant. The calamity reached its climax in 1950, when the marriage formally ended with the heartbreaking loss of life of Frances Ford Seymour. In a town where gossip and emotional recklessness were rampant, Stewart never once allowed himself to be drawn into the fray. He used his personal experience with his friend's calamity to anchor his own commitment to discretion, fidelity, and honor. He focused entirely on supporting Henry Fonda through the unimaginable grief. This tragedy reinforced Stewart's inherent belief that public reputation should always yield to private integrity and loyalty. The experience solidified Stewart's belief that one's personal code must remain unbreakable. When he finally committed to Gloria, it was with the quiet, steadfast certainty of a man who chose, consciously, to build a home founded on simple, enduring devotion. The moral steadiness of James Stewart stands in stark opposition to the turbulent love life of our next star. We explore Tyrone Power, the matinee idol whose stunning looks could command the screen but could not keep his one true love from seeking comfort elsewhere. The matinee idol's true love, Tyrone Power and the Forbidden Affair. Tyrone Power was arguably the most handsome man in Hollywood. The one woman he truly loved was ultimately driven to seek comfort elsewhere, turning to an influential figure in his constant absence. Power's career soared in the 1940s, but his relentless schedule, dictated by the powerful studio system, left little room for domestic life. His second wife, Linda Christian, struggled with the loneliness imposed by his fame. The core calamity of their union lay in the control the studio wielded over Power's life. He was sent on long, demanding location shoots. During one of these prolonged absences, Linda Christian reportedly developed an attachment with the immensely influential studio executive Darryl F. Zanuck, or a figure of similar towering influence. This was a desperate attempt to fill the void left by a husband who was emotionally present but physically unavailable. The actor was privately tormented by the knowledge that the industry that demanded his absence was the very institution that led to his private anguish. He was a prisoner of his own success. When the marriage ended in 1955, Power deeply regretted the loss. The star's subsequent search for a lasting family unit led him to his third wife, Debbie Power, with whom he had 2 children. Tragically, he suffered a fatal cardiac event in 1958 at the young age of 44. His premature passing was a final tragic consequence of a life perpetually strained between the demands of fame and the desire for domestic peace. The final chapters of Tyrone Power's life are a poignant reminder that even the most beautiful and successful stars could not evade the emotional cost of fame. His betrayal was rooted in the system's power. The quiet suffering of the matinee idol stands in contrast to the thunderous fall of our final star. Next, we conclude our journey with John Gilbert, the silent king whose personal heartbreak was compounded by the failure of his voice and the infidelity of his fiery wife. The Silent King's Roar, John Gilbert, and the Rise of Vaudeville's Firebrand. John Gilbert was the silent king of Hollywood. As his reign dimmed with the coming of sound, his marriage to the fiery vaudeville star Leatrice Joy also faced a tragic end. Her alleged indiscretions became a public humiliation that broke the heart of a king whose voice, sadly, had failed him. Gilbert and Joy were married in 1922. Joy was a celebrated talent herself. The collapse of their marriage was tragically compounded by the sudden, brutal arrival of sound technology. His voice was brutally mocked. The profound loss of his professional standing coincided precisely with the disintegration of his marriage. As Gilbert's power waned, Leatrice Joy reportedly sought comfort and companionship elsewhere. The irony was devastating. The once powerful king was powerless to stop the betrayal that was unfolding as his career spiraled downward. For Gilbert, this was a double devastation. He was losing not only his position as a cinematic god, but also the devotion of his wife. The humiliation of the alleged infidelity created a deep, festering emotional heartbreak. Gilbert retreated into a destructive pattern, seeking solace in alcohol. The man who had defined romantic passion on screen became a figure of private sorrow. Leatrice Joy filed for divorce in 1924. For Gilbert, the heartbreak was a severe blow. He later married twice more, culminating in his eventual premature passing at the age of 36. John Gilbert's story is a heartbreaking illustration of the precarious nature of fame. These final acts of betrayal and resilience remind us that even the Golden Age icons were just people with messy, complicated lives that defied the script. Like this video to help us uncover more hidden Hollywood history. Subscribe so you never miss another untold story, and leave a comment below to tell us which betrayal surprised you most.